Louisiana versus all y'all, Jarrett Roser with the takeaways, recap, whatever you want to call it, video of LSU's 34-17 defeat of UCLA on Saturday, September 21st. And I think biggest takeaway, obviously, is when I arrive at halftime after covering Tulane versus the Raging Cajuns in the morning in Lafayette, it's a 17-17 ball game. After the halftime break, 17-0 LSU wins that second half, and at times somewhat dominant fashion to get a big Power 4 win. And so clearly I'm a difference maker, and we need to make sure that I'm there for everything the rest of the way. If you guys want to fund the road trips and whatnot, let me know. But in all seriousness, the defensive turnaround from first half to second half was, I think, as big of a talking point as anything coming out of that game. You look at, obviously, a shutout of a Power 4 team, and the dynamics of essentially having UCLA's first half production across the board in the second half in terms of yardage and passing yardage. The third down conversion percentage was a huge difference. They were 4 for 7 in the first half, plus a 1 for 1 fourth down. And so they're pushing almost 60% conversion rate, which is much better than where they'd been on the season in that first half and the fourth down conversion. The second half, the Tigers only allow them to go 1 for 5. And so down to 20%, you're, cutting that first half percentage down to, into about a third of what it had been. And I think just the level of consistency, and that's kind of what Whit Weeks was talking about, that in the first half, we saw some of the same sort of miscues that have been frustrating through the first few weeks of the season. And that the second half, a lot got cleaned up. People were playing on the same page, and that it was kind of an example of what this defense and what this team can be if they can put that together, sort of proof of concept of what they can be, put that together for 4 quarters. And I think that's kind of where we are in the big season picture, is that we have seen this defense show flashes, be really encouraging at points this season, but it's been a matter of finding a level of consistency of, on a given play, every one of 11 guys on the field doing their job. Brian Kelly and his really comedic post-game press conference that you should check out if you haven't yet. He talked about DYJ, do your job. And so getting that level of consistency of each of 11 guys doing their job on a particular play, now trying to get the consistency of that occurring for nearly 4 complete quarters on a given Saturday. And then ultimately, if you can get to that point, hopefully sooner than later, because we'll talk about it in a second, but things are going to get a lot more complicated and challenging than UCLA here pretty soon. If you can then find the consistency to do that week to week, Saturday after Saturday, definitely a lot to be encouraged about in terms of what we saw, particularly in the second half. Also a lot to take from the big picture, and, particularly that first half, that is concerning, knowing that a potent South Alabama team is coming to Baton Rouge in a week. And then 2 weeks from there, after a bye week, you have to deal with Ole Miss, who is one of the top handful of teams in the country right now at the start of this season, and then the rest of the SEC slate to follow. And so things just get a lot tougher in a hurry, and these guys have to find a way to improve that level of consistency. Brian Kelly keeps talking about how close they are, but we see the same sort of issues, miscues happening week to week. They're at a point now where it's kind of a deadline to get this figured out if they're going to have the type of season that they want to have, and be able to compete with an Ole Miss and Alabama and go win a whole lot of SEC games the back half of the season, and be looked at as a potential SEC contender, or just playoff contender, really be one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the SEC by the end of this season. Awful lot of talk about offense. Awful lot of talk about defense. Let's talk a little bit about the offense, where Garrett Nussmeier, season highs in terms of attempts, yardage, with 32 for 44 performance for 352 yards, had his 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, completed nearly 73% of his passes. Again, just another really strong outing for Garrett Nussmeier, leading some long touchdown drives for the Tigers. Got a lot of different people involved. I was honestly a little bit surprised by the fashion in which LSU broke away in the second half, because we talked about it in our kind of weekend preview episode of Podnas a couple of days ago with Daniel Hawks. I thought that the offense would be too much for UCLA to keep up with, and that the defense would kind of get enough stops, and Garrett Nussmeier and company would stretch the thing out over the course of the second half. The offense was steady. The defense is really what turned it up a notch and was shut down in the second half. But another overall good performance by the offense. I thought Caden Durham was going to be more of a factor in the run game. You saw it be Josh Williams and Caleb Jackson more so when they were able to get that going in terms of actual traditional rushing yardage. Caden Durham obviously factoring in with the two catches for 40 yards and a touchdown. And so that, kind of the extension of the run game with some short passing stuff to Durham and Caleb Jackson, who I like what we saw from him as a receiver and getting some yak and still showing his physicality, bowling over guys after the catch. That was big. Aaron Anderson continues to come on. Mason Taylor is the all-time career leading receiver amongst tight ends in program history. And so there's an interview up with him as well, talking about just the significance of that to him and what it means to be a big part of this program. By the end of the game, you end up with 9 different receivers with catches. So really encouraging there, including the beautiful Nussmeier to Kyle Parker touchdown play. And so seeing more guys stepping up into roles, you really enjoy seeing that at this point in the season. And I've had a lot of confidence in the offense throughout this season thus far, still do moving forward. Just a matter of, can this defense now use some of the aspects and flashes and whatnot we've seen at different points, to this point in the season. Braden Swinson coming on so strong on that side of the ball and things of that. Can you take those aspects and a level of consistency you saw in the second half against UCLA and build that into a 4-quarter game that they're going to badly need when we see this team get into the meat of the SEC slate? Also wanted to hit on a takeaway from Saturday that became somehow the talking point of Twitter through the second half and into the night on Saturday. The stadium, by the time I got there at halftime, coming from the parking lot to the stadium, I was a little bit thrown off by how upstream in terms of foot traffic I was traveling. I've never been to a game that late, and so I didn't know if that was a normal sight, but it was just a lot of people flooding their way toward the parking lots. And then when I got there and heard the announced attendance of whatever it was, 100,000, 300 some odd, and looked around at what we could see from our vantage point in the press box, it was pretty sparse on that side of the stadium over there, the east side, I guess, that was still in the sun. And so that was kind of interesting. But the more you saw pictures of how packed the west side of the stadium remained, and the more you started to hear some of the reports of 70 plus individuals that were there needing medical attention, and just hearing from people, I think some of the criticism of fans was off base, missed the point of understanding how damn hot it gets in those stands at times on a Saturday afternoon in September. And I don't know what you do about that. I know people are ticked off that there's an early kickoff for LSU in September and they want everything to be night games. Same time, I understand the dynamics of the importance of TV in terms of the money that flows into college athletics. And so, I don't love, certainly as a fan, I didn't love the afternoon kickoffs, and I get where folks are coming from in terms of there were legitimate health and safety issues coming out of how hot it was down there during that game. And so, as much as I think it's fair at times to criticize fans for leaving games early and whatnot, I don't know that this was a great example. And so folks that are kind of using this to beat up the fan base in terms of where are you in a tied Power 4 game, I think just kind of back off a little bit, and more so than trying to take issue with the folks that left, credit to the folks that stayed and were there to support a strong second half by the Tigers. I, as a student and as a fan, went through some hot games, certainly, and stayed, and it's not always fun, but credit to the folks that did it. And now we'll get that night game next week against South Alabama. So hopefully a lot of folks are out there for that one. Support that LSU football team in another big game heading into that bye week, a game that we need to see a lot of strides from this team in terms of, again, nothing crazy, nothing we haven't seen in flashes yet to this point in the season, but seeing strides in terms of the consistency of putting it all together over the course of play by play, 4 full quarters. Anyway, that's all I've got. Again, check out that Brian Kelly press conference if you haven't already. There's also interviews up there with Garrett Nussmeier, Mason Taylor, and Whit Weeks, kind of talking about everything that they took away from that game and what they look at now moving forward into the rest of the schedule. As always, thanks y'all for tuning in. I'm Jared Roses, Louisiana versus all y'all. Y'all be well.